So, just how quickly can Australia's population grow without putting too much pressure on our infrastructure and our cost of living? Simon Kuestenmacher is the co-founder of the Melbourne-based The Demographics Group, and he joins me now from there. Simon, many thanks for your time. That's a big question a lot of Australians would right now be asking themselves. It's all very well to say, right, we can help our economy by bringing in all of these people, but at what point does it start to put pressures on that same economy?
Well, the pressures are already there because we were negligent in not providing enough housing, not providing enough infrastructure to allow for that big population growth that we actually knew we wanted as a nation. On top of this, for decades we didn't build enough social housing, so that the housing shortage is of course the worst at the bottom end of the market, where people really don't have much wiggle room, and these pressures are only going to increase over the next year and a half at the very least, because even if we really were to amp up the housing pipeline now, which of course I hope we do, in the short term there will be a lot of pain on the lower end of the housing market.
OK, so that's the housing market, but then there's also the skills shortages in Australia. There aren't enough workers, there aren't enough skills, and that's what the migration review by the government, by the former Treasury Secretary, Martin Parkinson, that's what that's come up with, and that's the justification the government would have for raising the population so quickly.
Absolutely, and the high migration approach is probably the smartest approach to keep the economy ticking along nicely, particularly to ensure that our ageing Australians have the care workers that they need, because you want to remember that in the next 12 years we're doubling the population 85 plus. That's the population cohort that needs care, and at the moment there is just no way that a 75-year-old today has a fighting chance to get the care that they need in 10 years' time. The only way to get these carers operating is to import them from overseas, and this is all fair and well, but what we need to do quite desperately in Australia is to link our housing policy and our migration policy. They need to work hand in glove.
OK, so the housing policy and the migration policy need to work hand in glove, but so does infrastructure. And we know, say, for example, that the government has just literally blown up Infrastructure Australia and its plans to rebuild that, that priority list, the way in which our infrastructure priorities lie. And this also comes even with, say, the way in which a national broadband network is now operating around. It's changing the priorities, changing the way in which our demography and our population is living.
Oh, absolutely. And the infrastructure pipeline is a fun thing to look at, because if you were to line up all the state and federal budgets and look at all the wonderful infrastructure projects that are in there, there's simply no way that we can build them with the existing population cohort, with the existing workforce. So therefore it is much needed that as independent body as possible, like Infrastructure Australia, writes a priority list that then gets followed through. But of course, in Australia, we also find ourselves in a situation where any kind of development, be it infrastructure, be it housing, has a lot of opportunities to be vetoed down the track. So our local government areas have a lot of veto power, which is why the federal government is now talking to local governments to find a way to limit this very strong tendency of local governments to veto major projects.
That's true. Now, the interesting thing you said earlier was bringing in more people, bringing in the 1.5 million people over the next 5 years, that is the right way to go as a society. But then at the same time, we both agree that they're behind with the infrastructure list, behind with the housing building. What sort of pressures are going to come in the Australian society as a result of this?
Well, what we're seeing, if you want to know where the housing pressures are, so what's happening over the next 15 years is that the millennials, people born in the 80s and 90s, are leaving the inner city behind because they are now starting families. They look for 3- and 4-bedroom homes, meaning the millennials leave behind a lot of 1- and 2-bedroom dwellings in the inner suburbs of our big cities. That is exactly the property that the migration, the new migrants need. So in a sense, the new migrants might even find homes as long as millennials leave their inner suburbs as is projected. But that then puts a lot of pressure nonetheless still on the urban fringe, on middle Australia, to actually provide enough sizable or family-sized homes. And at the moment, the pipeline for family-sized homes is nearly large enough, it's not nearly large enough to accommodate for this big generation of millennials to find a family-sized home.
Great to chat to you today on the program. Many thanks for your time.
It's been a pleasure.